We're back. Randy, what's going on?
Broderick, how's
Buddy?
it? You know
Good,
what? I'll
man.
tell
How
you
are you
exactly.
doing? I haven't even asked my question yet. You're so
I
excited. You
know.
interrupted me.
I
What are you
am. I
trying to tell
am.
me?
I am. I am just overflowing with joy. So, my wife and I,
Wow.
we've been
What a way to
trying
start
to
this.
yeah, we have been trying to move back to the Pittsburgh area for a while. Like we live in Pennsylvania, we live in rural Pennsylvania. We've been looking for excuses to move back to Pittsburgh for a while. Well, my wife very like she's been going on a job hunt and she has found a job and we're moving back to Pittsburgh. And I am so
Woo.
excited. Yes, I am so excited.
Okay,
Um
so
yeah,
I've never been to Pittsburgh.
shame. Shame on you. Pittsburgh is listen,
Straight to jail. Straight to
yeah,
jail.
no, yeah, straight to jail. So Pittsburgh is a city that a lot of people think that they have an understanding of what Pittsburgh is about, but they really don't because Pittsburgh is like an ever blooming onion of like cultures and ethnicities
Huh.
and richness that everybody just thinks like, oh, they have the Steelers and it's dirty. And like,
Yeah, that's kind of that's kind of what I was thinking.
yeah, and they put French fries on their sandwiches, which
That
I
doesn't
personally
sound like a
hate.
bad thing. Oh, wow.
Um,
Okay, we just went two very different directions with that.
yes, absolutely. But so yes, so Pittsburgh is. I lived there a long time ago. I met my wife there. A lot of like really good memories. Can't wait to move back.
Nice.
So my wife and I were trying to find a place to live in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, like Google has an office there now. Apple has an office. Duolingo has their offices in Pittsburgh. Like Pittsburgh is starting like it's seriously like taking off as a tech hub. And as a result of that, like
Nice.
all of the house prices are kind of going up along with that. I mean, you get a bunch of Google engineers, you're going to charge them a lot of money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, so
Interesting.
yeah. So I was just like, okay, so we're gonna find a place. Well, a couple of weekends ago, I'm playing some tabletop RPGs with some friends, and one of my friends, I'm like, oh, hey, I haven't told him that I'm moving back to the city yet. Because I would do like day trips to Pittsburgh to play games with my friends. And I said, hey, we're moving back to the city, told him the story, told him about my wife's job. And he's like, have you found a place to stay yet? And I'm like, no, we're still looking. We're not sure if we're going to buy a house or rent a house. And he, like, I start getting into the details and he stops me and he's like, Randy, he's like, listen, he said, I have a spare house. You can live there. Just pay the mortgage. And I'm like, okay, like I'm a little bit suspicious. Like my friend is, I mean, he is a like super genius, like technology engineer. And so I'm pretty sure that the house is going to be pretty good. But I'm like, I want to go and check out this house. This house is, it is several blocks from Duolingo's offices. It is 6 bedrooms. It's a beautiful house. And I'm getting like the deal of a lifetime on it. And so like it's crazy that not only is my family moving back to Pittsburgh where we've wanted to be forever, like because of a friend, like I'm getting this sweetheart deal to live in this amazing house where I can like walk to Trader Joe's and walk to Whole Foods and, walk to
How
the
ritzy is
Duolingo
this area?
offices. It's 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 one of those
When you got a
areas.
Whole Foods in walking distance, we all know.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it is.
We
It
know
is
the deal.
bougie. Yeah, it's also walking distance to the Google office, to the Apple office. Um, and this part of town, it's called East Liberty.
Bringing up for a job
Um,
as director at Fortune, knowing where you're moving.
yeah, I remember when I lived in Pittsburgh, this part of town was scary. Like it was very scary. It had like rundown like factories. Like there was an old Nabisco factory that was boarded up that it's like only squatters live there. And then like right as I moved away from Pittsburgh about 15 years ago, everything started to blossom. Like I moved away, it started to get great. I'm going to move back. It's going to sink again. So it'll be great. So
Wow.
that's what I'm excited
Yeah,
about. So,
I've always thought of Pittsburgh as dirty Steelers, Penguins, and I've always thought of more than anything just like grit, like tough blue
yeah.
collar people, very similar to Philadelphia. And I have no reason to think that other than just media. Like
Mhm.
if Batman can be filmed there and it can exude what is Gotham, then I'm feeling like, all right, like that's what I think of. Just gritty, tough, blue collar, hard. The Steelers, like they roll up their sleeves, they get things done and whatever. Uh but you're saying it's not fair. It's not a full assessment. Maybe
No,
part of it, but
it's absolutely not.
it's not the whole
I
picture.
absolutely not.
The
So when
deceptive design that the
it
media has put in
is,
our way.
it absolutely is. And so I worked at the University of Pittsburgh while I was there. And one of the big things that myself and the other designers in the Office of Public Affairs designing websites for the University of Pittsburgh, one of the big things that was on our mind is trying to make sure that our websites looked clean and neat and technical. Like we didn't want to use like gritty textures, we didn't want to use darker colors. We wanted to present Pittsburgh as like this like rejuvenated city. In fact, the university was so behind, like trying to improve the appearance of the city, that the Cathedral of Learning, which is the big campus building, which is like I think the fifth or seventh largest educational building in the world, um, they actually paid to get it clean. They paid millions of dollars to get all of the grime from the 20s, 30s, 50s off of it. And now it's like this brand new building.
Wow.
So yeah, Pittsburgh is trying to represent itself so that it's not like people aren't deceived by what the media is telling them, because everything like it's Steel City, and that's a
Mhm.
real strong identity in Pittsburgh, and that's never going to go away. But this idea of like gritty and smoky and ashy does have to go away so that you can focus
Yeah.
on other things.
Yeah, and sometimes the media gets it right. Other times, like I love the city of Chicago. And when I tell people, "Oh yeah, we're going to go be doing this filming this week out in this part of Chicago," people are like, "Ah, be careful. It's dangerous." And I'm sure there's tons of danger in Chicago that I don't see. One thing I will say, yes, there's a lot of unfortunate gang violence there, but also the parts of town I go to just never see it. And so I do think sometimes things are overblown. Like, yeah, I mean, anywhere you go, whether you're in Omaha, Nashville, whatever, you go to rough areas or sometimes not rough areas, like you can find danger anywhere. I get that.
Mhm.
For me, this last week, I almost unintentionally, unbeknownst to me, got into a fist fight on 6th Street in Austin, Texas, because I didn't support someone's flag football team. So that
Well,
doesn't warrant a story at all. Just happened. No, I was doing some feet on the street videos, and this guy comes up to me, and he's like, "Hey, man," and he's on a Lime scooter, and he stops. I kid you not, like an inch from my face and feet. Like he stops me in my tracks. Like he scoots in and stops on a dime, and I was like, "What is happening?" And he's like, "Hey, man," shows me his flyers. Like, we need to raise $750 for this flag football team. Every dollar counts. Can we get $1? And I'm like, no. No,
pretty
sorry.
straightforward answer.
I just want to be in my mind. I'm like, I don't even feel bad. I really do not care about your flag football team. So, anyways, like, there's a lot of ways to make money, and if asking people for it on the street is the most effective, good for you. I'm just not the right candidate to be speaking to support you in that endeavor. Anyway, so about 2 minutes later, I'm with my project manager, Deandra, and up comes this other guy who very clearly is part of the same group. Right? Same flyer, everything. And he's
Yeah.
like, before he says anything, I look at him and I knew I ticked him off with this. I just said, "Hey, sorry, man." Before he says a word, he opens his mouth before he says a word. I'm like, "Hey, sorry, man, can't give $1." And he stops. He just looks me dead in the eyes and he's like, "Why?" Now I've got kids, and one of my favorite answers whenever I ask like my kiddo something, I'm like, "Why'd you do this?" Like my toddler's like, "'Cause I did." And
Mhm.
so the guy looks at
Yeah.
me. He's like, "I can't give $1." He's like, "Why?" I'm like, "'Cause I can't." He's like, "Why?" I'm like, "'Cause I can't." And he's looking at me right in the eyes, like pissed off, right? He's like legit, like putting his hand on my gut, literally feeling me up to see like if I slug this guy, what's he actually packing, kind of thing.
Mhm.
Wild. Whole time I'm just looking him right in the eye, just smiling, not trying to piss him off or anything. I'm just also not giving him a dollar. And so he's like pressing in. He's like, you know, a dollar's not anything. Come on, man. I know it's not nothing to you. Like, basically, he's not even really asking for a dollar anymore. He's just trying to say, like, oh, you think you're like better than me kind of thing. He's like, you know, it's
Mhm.
not nothing. Like, what's your problem? And I look and I'm like, wow, all right. Well, hey, tell you what, we're doing feet on the street interviews right now. I don't know what your time is worth, but for 30 seconds of your time with these two questions, I'd happily give you a dollar for that. And now in my mind, you need $750. If you got a dollar every 30 seconds, sure, whatever. Like you're done in
Yeah.
4 hours. But he
Yeah.
looks at me and he's like, man, I could go down the street and get $20 from somebody else. I'm like, then you should. The
Yeah.
opportunity cost of this time, if that's the case, then you really should go somewhere else. And he's just like, you know, basically shakes my hand kind of thing, gives me this really menacing look. Like, I'm just, just letting you know, a dollar ain't nothing. I'm like, all right, cool. And so sometimes now, before I went there, mind you, the media and everything else had painted Sixth Street as Dirty Sixth in Austin, Texas. It's also where Joe Rogan's
Mhm.
comedy club was, and I did get into that. So I was like trying to meet people, see if I could find my way in and see. We did see Tony Rock, Chris Rock's brother.
Oh, nice.
Amazing time. Highly recommend, but it is on Dirty Six. Sometimes things are painted and they are just exactly how they how they're advertised. Not
Ah,
always, but sometimes.
yeah, but even like, even though you know what you're getting into, you have an expectation that like it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't happen that way.
Yeah.
And like your situation just it makes me like turning this back around to dark patterns a little bit
Mm.
and what they are. Dark patterns are basically what you experienced with that person where it's like, listen,
Well, hold
I
on. What are
asked you
dark
something.
patterns?
Well, great. Okay, let me explain what a dark
He's like,
pattern
stop
is. You don't
interrupting
know
me and
what
I'll
that
tell
is?
you.
Listen. Yeah, listen. If you give me a dollar, I will tell you the answer to that question. What a
Dang
dark
it.
pattern is. Will you give me a dollar?
Oh, I've literally lost all my dollars to flag football. Now I, not this guy.
Man, you
Got
gotta
$1 left,
should have
Randy.
given it to the Steelers.
I know.
All right. So dark patterns, basically, every area of expertise can be used for good or for evil. Okay. And user experience and the psychology behind it and understanding how to make a good user experience can be twisted to dark purposes or dark patterns. And basically what this is like these are patterns that harm users,
Mm,
okay, by like creating like people will lose money, people will lose privacy, people lose control over like the content they create, the money they have, things like that. Basically, what it is it is an institution, creating this process, this flow, this app that is built to serve the purposes of the business at the expense of the user.
mm,
So, like, that's a real big broad term. Like, there's obstruction, there's like wording tricks, nagging, being emotionally manipulative. Like if you've ever had like a pop-up come up and it's like, subscribe to our puppies newsletter and the choices are like to subscribe or I don't like puppies to dismiss it. Like
mm,
that is a dark pattern because that's
mm.
emotionally abusive. Um and so like that's kind of what a dark pattern or a deceptive pattern is.
Yeah,
So
you were talking beforehand about the Wall Street Journal with that. I don't know what you
mhm.
have to say regarding deceptive design patterns, but I do want to say I hate the Wall Street Journal with everything in me. I will never ever forget. I was at a San Antonio Spurs game, and you won't believe this, in San Antonio.
What are the
And
odds?
yeah, it was insanity. Anyway, so okay, we're at the game and there's this blanket. It's probably not that nice of a Spurs blanket, but I'm like 20 and I'm like, "Oh, that looks kind of cool." And they're like, "You want it? It's yours." And I'm like,
Ooh.
"What do I got to do?" And it's like this person on the corner of the arena, like literally like a drug deal's going down. Like, "Tell you what, all you got to do is give me your email, sign right here, and you subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. Best part is first 3 months are free. Don't worry, super easy, cancel at any time." I was like, "And then I get this blanket?" He's like, "Absolutely." Oh, no, she
Mhm.
was like, "Absolutely." And I'm like, "Cool. Take the blanket. Didn't think anything of it. Let me tell you, canceling the Wall Street Journal 10 years ago was not easy. I don't know what its process is now, but it was made to sound I was like, hold on. So I can just go over here, go to this and they made it sound like there was an easy portal on their website to hit unsubscribe. Was not the case. They're like super easy, barely an inconvenience. All the inconvenience. I had to call a phone number, put on hold. It was like the biggest process to get that thing canceled. And it was one of those things. And the craziest part about it that pisses me off is that I
Yeah.
remember it not being a ton of money. And it made me think, you know what? Like that actually is what gave me the fuel to the fire to stay on that call because I knew I bet most of the people in this 2-hour process, it might have been an hour, but like even an hour to cancel this thing, how many of them just give up along the way and they're like, whatever, it's $5 a month, $1 a month, whatever it was. They're just like, whatever.
Mhm.
And they don't cancel just because the process is so cumbersome, but it's not
Yeah.
indicated up front.
Let me tell you, it has not gotten better. It has absolutely not gotten better. So I like to bounce around like subscription services. Like whenever it comes to like television and movie like
Mm,
subscription services, I will bounce around. Like I'll subscribe to something for 3 months, watch a bunch of stuff, and then I'll cancel it and then go subscribe somewhere else to like get pardon me, to get like, to kind of move around and get exposed to things. I do the same thing with my news. Like there are a couple of news sources that I subscribe to fairly regularly, but like I'll turn them on and off because, like maybe I want to pay attention to the New York Times for a little bit. So a couple of years ago, I decided I'm like, you know what? I'm going to subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. I don't think I'm going to like it, but it is a perspective that is different from mine that I think will help broaden my perspective and make me think about things a little bit differently. So I subscribed. I had it for a couple of months. I was not enthused with it. But that's fine. And I decided I'm gonna cancel. Broderick, just like you, man, I was on the phone for like an hour trying to unsubscribe from the Wall Street Journal.
mm,
And I'm talking to somebody and they're like, "Hey, well, what if we offered you this?" I'm like, "No, just like unsubscribe me." Like it is
please.
so easy. It is so easy to get stuck in the mud. Like it's really easy to walk into the mud pits, but it is difficult to get out of those mud pits like
Hmm.
the Wall Street Journal, where they just, they intentionally use these like deceptive patterns to hold you, and they do it for the reasons that you outlined, which is like, well, it's a pain in the ass to unsubscribe. I'll wait till I have time to do it. What's $5 a month for the next 6 months? The reality is that in aggregate, with the thousands of other people who have subscribed who are having difficulty unsubscribing,
Mm,
it adds up. Give somebody a bonus. It's absolutely, it's terrible. And recently, just in the past, like I think like week or two before like recording this, the Justice Department is suing Adobe. Because
whoa.
Adobe does the same thing. So Adobe has like their creative suite, which you subscribe to like Photoshop, Illustrator, all of their different apps. And it's a wonderful suite of apps. I have like a high regard for Adobe's apps, but when you have to unsubscribe, okay, because those costs are really high, and they're for web design, there are better tools than Adobe's. I mean, that's why Adobe tried to buy Figma last year.
Mm, mm-hmm.
Um, like I had a number of accounts I needed to close for on behalf of Four Kitchens. And man, I tell you what, the chat was just like, well, what if we offered you this? What if we offered you that? What if you cancel all of them except for one, and we'll give you this one at a lower cost? And I'm like, oh my God, how many times do I have to tell you? Like, no. And so like, I'm very happy to see the Justice Department finally going after them. And maybe like some of the other corporate people will be like, hey, don't do this. Like make it easy for people to get out of their subscriptions, because here's what happens, Broderick. Okay.
Hmm.
What happens is when you engage with an entity, okay, whenever you go to a website, like you subscribe to Adobe apps, you subscribe to the Wall Street Journal, you want to have a positive experience with them. And
Right.
when it's time for you to leave, by creating that amount of friction and making it that difficult and making it that tough, creates at best, it creates hesitation. Like, do I want to subscribe to Adobe apps again? Do I want to subscribe to the Wall Street Journal again?
Yeah.
People start saying like, "Oh, I heard you were thinking about subscribing to the Wall Street Journal. I want to tell you about my terrible experience unsubscribing." And so people will like begin word of mouth like, "Oh, if you like the content, it's great, but you're never getting out of there. You're stuck in that mud pit."
Mm.
Um and what happens at worst is you take all of any brand like regard that anyone has for you and you just throw it in the dumpster and light it on fire. And who needs that? Like let people eject out quickly and come back in just as quickly. You're gonna build up a good rapport with those people. So that's
Yeah, I
one of
agree.
my big pain points.
I recently canceled something and it was some subscription. And but the way to cancel it, they said you got to email us at this contact email. And I was like, oh, that's annoying. Which I always hate that the most. I mean, obviously, it's the most
Mhm.
like you don't really know, it's not automated. And then like 2 months went by and I didn't know because I mean, I don't check all my credit card expenses. And I had to follow up and I followed up in an email to them and I said, hey, was this canceled? I never got a response. And I'm again, I, so I go everywhere, and I'm not going through all my credit card expenses to see if it's just easier for me to open up my phone and just follow up. But he
Yeah.
just clicked in my brain. I'm like, oh yeah, didn't I cancel that? I don't know. And I looked at me. I'm like, sure enough, never heard back from them though. So we followed up, and then they're like, oh yeah, we canceled it 15 minutes after you emailed us. Sorry. And I'm just like, that's just not a great. It tells me that you don't have your stuff together on the back end, and like you making it harder just makes me never want to come back as a user. If I change my mind or whatever, I'm like, oh, I remember getting out of it. It was such a pain that it's just not worth it. Or even like if I have to email, if customer service is just awesome throughout, great. One thing I'm going to say to the entire like audience right now that's listening, Amazon, beware. The last few I just got a note from our producer on the back, and he's like, "Stop moving. Your mic is picking up every single sound." So, all right, well, that's happening. So I'm gonna freeze, not move, and tell my Amazon story. All right, so I purchased a bunch of different pairs of pants, and it wasn't. To be fair, it wasn't Amazon's wardrobe thing, but it was one order. I was like, I'm gonna try a 32-30, 32-32, or whatever, all these different pant sizes, and in that, I only wanted one. And so I tried to return the rest. And Amazon gave me a bunch of individual QR codes. But one of the orders they had returned, one of them were, I spent more to return to UPS, but one of them defaulted to Whole Foods on the QR code. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. So I call and I'm like, hey, could you switch this over? Like, it took maybe 10 minutes. I'm driving there. I got screaming kids in the back. Could you switch this over to UPS? And they're like, oh, yeah. Okay, sure. 5 minutes go by. They get it switched over, update my QR code. I get to UPS. I have one box because they sent it all to me in one box. Oh, mind you, here's the other thing. Amazon had emailed me beforehand saying, would you like to reduce boxes and be eco friendly? It'll take longer, but it's good for the world. And I'm like, absolutely. I don't care. I don't need these pants tomorrow. So they sent it all to me in one box. So I take that same box, I go to UPS, it's all switched over, and I'm like, here are my pants, here's the multiple QR codes, here's this one box. They're like, oh no, we need one QR code. I'm like, wow. Kids are screaming, running around the store. I take them out. I'm like, whatever. We're just gonna get back in the car. I'll call Amazon. So I call Amazon. I'm like, can I get one QR code? They're like, oh, that's just not possible. I'm like, it's one order. And not only that, it's the same seller.
Yeah.
Why do you mean it's not possible? They're like, it's just not possible. And I'm like, that just blew my mind. I'm like, maybe we can figure it out together. And so
Oh my
then
god.
we get to, so I'm at this point, I'm like, you know what? It's taking so long. I'm just going to go run my other errands. So I load up the kids. We go to Costco. We're on other places. And finally, they're like, okay, there's one way, only one way it's possible. Do you have a Whole Foods? I was like, not in my town. I have to go to a different town because I'm not Randy. I'm not bougie and live by a Whole Foods and I can just walk to it. And they're like, that's the only way we can do this is you go to a Whole Foods, they will package it for you. And I'm like, wow. And or some of them will allow you to do that at Kohl's and you don't need a box. But that's the thing now with Amazon. If
Mm.
you buy multiple things in one order, you better know you're keeping it, or they're gonna make
Oh my
sure it is a
goodness.
pain to return, which is really new because, right, for most of Amazon's history, to my knowledge, it was known for, like, pretty stellar customer service. Like, "Oh, you had
Absolutely.
something?
They that
No
they
problem."
they they ran everything. They ran their margins down to a thin line on making sure that customer service was top notch so that they could get all of the other players off the
Mm,
board. And now that they've been largely successful at that, now things are starting to kind of like push back. Like I remember whenever like 2-day delivery, 1-day delivery was new and it was
mhm,
fantastic. And then like same day delivery, if you lived in a city with the right kind of Amazon warehouse.
mm.
And then I've noticed in the last couple of years, it's like, hey, can this take longer for us to ship to you? Like
Yeah, yeah.
you're a Prime member. Can we send it to you next Tuesday, perhaps?
Mm,
And like just it's the term is enshittification, which if you're not familiar with,
I like it, though.
so Cory Doctorow is an author who talks a lot about like technology and freedom in technology and open source stuff. And he's written a lot of great books, both fiction and nonfiction. And he coined the term enshittification. And basically, what it is as a business is growing, okay, when they're going up the hill, they're like offering things at low cost, discount, free pricing, good customer service, all of this until it hits like a tipping point where like suddenly
Mm,
like the service has to like it has not as it's running up the ramp to be successful, they are operating at a loss basically. Like a lot of companies are like we're taking investor money so that we can burn it early, get market share, and then figure out how to like make money later.
mm,
And when they hit that tipping point where it's like, okay, the bills come due, the investment capital is going away, the enshittification begins, which is, all of the stuff that made the service desirable by people start to get turned
mm.
off. Stuff like, all the Amazon Prime benefits like shipping 2-day. Like you can still get that, but they're like,
Mm.
why don't you let us send that a little bit later? Or we need one QR code unless you go to the next town over for Whole Foods or
Yeah.
and begin like uh creating a problem. And it's called enshittification because what the company did is they didn't actually figure out a business model. They were riding on
Mm,
and like investment capital. And so now they've got to turn around and figure out how to make money. And all of that trust, all of that relationship building that you've made gets
mhm.
burnt. I mean, we've seen it recently with Reddit. So Reddit, basically like the front page of the internet, as it's called, has been a marvelous site. It has its problems. Listen, Reddit is not perfect, but
Right.
Reddit was a place that a lot of people enjoyed, and
Mhm.
they had as part of what they had available to people, they had an API that you could read and write from, and this allowed like an ecosystem of like third party apps to develop. um, and it was great because like if you didn't like what Reddit chose for their app interface, you could choose another one. Like there's a very popular one called Apollo,
Mm.
that like I was partial to. I really liked it. It stripped away a lot of Reddit's garbage features and just like boiled it down to its essence for me.
Yeah.
And Reddit has been positioning for an IPO, and so they're like, we need to be able to charge money for this stuff. Their Reddit's website got scraped for AI use, so they like shut off the API, started charging a ton of money for it. So now all of these different free tools that people had made to collectively make Reddit better, like there were a lot of moderation tools to help with
Mm, mhm.
accessibility and things. They couldn't do it because it was going to cost them like, 10, 20, $30,000 a month in API fees to do that because
Mm,
Reddit was trying to get that sweet AI scraping money.
mm.
And like, they're trying to head towards an IPO, so they're trying to show that they're profitable, and they've got like money centers, and like they recently rebranded. They actually used Pentagram out of New York City to
Huh.
help rebrand. And so like,
Didn't even notice that.
yeah. So like advertisements everywhere now. Um, a lot of the freedom that really made Reddit kind of feel like Reddit. has gone away to like a bunch of corporate gloss and shitification. I know that was long, but like
No,
I
it's
have
good
strong
though. I
feeling.
didn't know any of
I have
that.
strong feelings about enshittification, which
I
ties
mean,
into deceptive patterns because they really go hand in hand. Because when you start, what happens is like whenever they hit that top of that curve and start the enshittification to try and like charge more money for people, what they have
mhm,
to do is they have to staunch that flow of users exiting, of like buyers exiting. And so what they do is they make it more difficult. They say like, hey,
mhm.
instead of being able to just cancel your account, you're going to have to reach out to a person and talk to them in chat or email or on the phone.
Right.
Yeah,
Which
it's
is yeah, yeah, totally. Like they're going out of their way to make it more difficult and like which is mind blowing to me because I mean, it really does show like and I understand like there's just a reality that Amazon you got to a certain size and you just don't have to care anymore. Like our core
Mhm.
competency is not, one of our, key APIs. We're not going to really focus on customer service. We have all of this other stuff down. That's what we're good at. We don't really care, whatever. I have other horror stories with Amazon. There is a reality though that so obviously we've my from our conversation anyway, I've done a good amount of sales in my career. And
Oh
one
yeah.
thing that will always bother me is when I feel because the reality is with sales, I always pitch something I believe in to someone I think could actually find it useful. If I tell everyone, you should get a Costco membership. I almost every single human I know, I don't work for them. I just believe in it. And so people say, what does it take to make a good salesperson? I'm like, I don't know. For me, it's authenticity. If I from working in retail, cell phones to healthcare sales, find someone who actually could find value in it. It's a much easier sale because you understand their situation and you can talk to them about it. There was someone recently, though, who, and it happens from time to time, where they
Mhm.
said, we think he's just trying to upsell us. And that's fair, right? I don't know everyone's financial situation down to the dollar, but I remember hearing that and being kind of bothered because I'm like, actually, what we're trying to do, and it wasn't even like this business. This was actually, I should say, a long while ago. But I was talking to someone about that, and they thought I was like trying to upsell them. And I think this was back in my U.S. cellular days. But I just remember being kind of bothered because, well, one, it calls out your integrity as like, you're trying
Yeah.
to pull the, wool and sheep. What is it called? The
Pull the wool
wolf in
over your
sheep's
eyes.
clothing. Yeah, and
Oh,
pulling the wolf over
wolf.
their eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're like, "Oh, there's something actually inside that's very self-motivated," which is fair. Anytime someone's selling you something, people automatically have walls up. But I also try to really pitch it like, if you don't if, if this is tough, like financially tough, this or that, like, don't think that I'm not trying to push it. I'm just trying to let you know your options. And sometimes a big part of that, especially when I was working in retail sales, is putting in a sense of urgency. I didn't have to like lie to do that. They always had sales campaigns. I'd say,
Yeah.
hey, come back tomorrow and this thing won't be here. You're here today, you get this. Like, what's going to be around tomorrow? I have no idea. They legit, they don't tell us. I don't know what's
Mhm.
going to happen, but I know if you buy today, you'll get this discount. And they're like, you're so full of it. All right, that's fine. But that there is a reality that some people I think have that impression, just like you're just trying to Wall Street Journal me, and it's like, well, this also is the reality and sometimes that is true, but the Amazon situations have happened, the Wall Street Journal situations have happened, and there's just automatic distrust with consumers for that reason.
Yeah. Like it's there is more value in having a trusted relationship, and there's more value in that trusted relationship than there is in a short-term exchange.
Mm,
Like there's a book called The Challenger Sale that talks about this. Like I don't have your intuitive like sales personality. um and so I read this book, and it's about connecting the right people with the right circumstances, because then people trust that you're like, if you understand their problem and can show that you have an expert understanding that you can help them solve that problem, that is the core of good salesmanship.
mm, mhm.
Um, when I had my first career job, it was a small mom and pop shop printer in Washington, Pennsylvania. I really enjoyed the job. And we got some new equipment, so we got a new like plate imaging technology. I worked for a print shop. I've not always been a print or a web designer. I was a print designer first, and we got like this new like direct to plate technology where we could print directly on the press plates, and then they would run the presses. Well, the guy who came in to train me how to use it, like we had 2 days of training and we were telling stories and stuff over lunch. And he tells me, he's like, listen, he talks about like personal integrity
Mm,
in the story. And he's like, listen, the salespeople were engaged with this client for the company that he worked for. And he's like, they were recommending this like $25,000 machine. Now, this was the late 90s. So $25,000 is a hell of a lot more money than it is today.
right.
Uh, and you wore an onion on your belt because it was the style at the time too. I know, I'm one of the olds. Um, so, but he talks like he's brought in because he's going to train them on this $25,000 piece of equipment, and he starts talking to them, and the salespeople like had left the room to go and do something, and this guy was like, "Hey, listen, just so you know, your problem can be solved with this $100 piece of software."
Yeah.
The salespeople were so
Mm,
angry because the salespeople also knew that that software solved their problems, but the salespeople were trying to make more money instead of legitimately solving a problem. So this guy
mm,
ended up getting like that account and having a long-term relationship with them that was trusted, as opposed to like, you know, because imagine this, had those individuals like bought that large piece of like that expensive piece of equipment and put it into production and used it and found out like 6 to 9 months later that they could have solved their problems with $100 piece of software. Can you imagine how they would feel and how angry they would be?
yeah. Yeah,
And
I know,
yeah,
man. It's
yeah.
one of those, like, it's tough, and that's where you're really, especially, like, when you are a business development person and you're really trying to put, like, and you've yeah, I don't know, I feel like one of the best ways to do it, if you are in that position of and you're listening to this and you're in business development and you're like, "No, like, someone really needs this." I think that just stresses the importance of early in the conversation learning as much as you can about excuse me, about that prospect, because, well, one, you're going to find out actually if they really do need it. Two, you're going to get to know them and it's a much easier sale. You can say, well, you said you got this going on, we noticed this because A, B, C. Look, do what you want, but ultimately this is how I think it can help you, and also this is how it's helped people in similar situations. It's a much more powerful sale, and you don't exactly get to do that online, right? People will go to a website and they'll determine for themselves whether or not they do or don't want something. But and Amazon's got a lot of great ways of doing it. They do instill like that daily deals, right? And different things.
Hmm.
But if you are on the business development side of this, maybe you do run your own design agency or web design agency or whatever. I see all the time people in those prospect calls listing how great they are, how great their services are. If you apply that 60-40 rule and let them speak for 60% up front, take some good notes. I mean, heck, you actually might, I think, get a kick out of this because you have that awesome how to map out a content strategy in 30 minutes or less. I was on the phone with somebody yesterday and we were talking about their podcast. And she's like, I just don't know what I'm going to talk about. I was like, why not? She's like, well, what am I going to say? So I asked her about things she's passionate about. And a lot of it came down to organic marketing. It's like, well, what does that actually mean? She's like, you know what it means. I'm like, yeah, but just tell me. So she broke it down. She's like, well, it's these three pillars. I'm like, okay, well, what are those things? Just kept asking questions. And by the
Hmm.
end of the call, I had taken a bunch of notes. I'm like, hey, this is what you're going to talk about this year. She's like, whoa. I was like, that's a year-long content calendar. I'm like, yeah, and it's stuff you actually already know all about. I would
Yeah.
advise bringing on these kinds of guests, doing these kinds of things. And she's like, huh. Now, if I had just like ran her over and said, these are the best practices, this is what you should do, like it wouldn't have been as effective. But just asking good
Hmm.
questions and getting to know people. And I do see platforms doing that right now. There's all these like AI systems that Apple's doing it, for example, with music. can we track you so we can send you like things that we think you're actually going to enjoy?" Which I'm like, makes a lot of sense. It's really cool, but I hate the way you asked me that. Like,
Yeah, so that's you know the concept of algorithms. Before we started talking about AIs, we were talking a lot about the algorithm, like on Facebook and
mhm.
Twitter and all of that.
Yeah.
And the reality is that those sorts of things are a double-edged sword. On one hand, I love that my Spotify DJ and my Spotify, like, the AI generated playlist that changes throughout the day. Those are perfect for me. I have no notes. Like, that's it. I love it. I turn my DJ on, I just let it go all day, and I am a happy little listener.
Mm.
On the
Yeah.
other end of things, when I log into Facebook the few times a year that I do that, like,
I was gonna say.
it's been giving me trash and just
Mhm.
continues to give me trash, and I'm just like, "Listen, like, I know that we're in an election year. I do not need to see everybody posting about it being an election year. That's the
Yeah.
last thing that I wanna need. I wanna see people's cats. That's what I want. Cats and kids.
Cats
Like,
and
that's it.
kids. You could
That's
create
it."
a group just for that of happy people on the internet who just really aren't trying to deal with it anymore. That's what you should create, Randy.
Well, I
But
mean, I tell you what, we do have a happy group of people on the internet, the Design a Good Company LinkedIn group.
no, there's
Like,
the
we've
call to
oh,
action. That
yes, yes.
that means we're close to
I
time. I
think,
don't like
like,
that. I don't like CTAs. That means we have to wrap up in a second. Why are you doing
I
this?
know. I'm doing this
We
because we've
can't
been
do this
talking
all
for
day.
listen, Broderick, we've in addition to this podcast, we also had another 30-minute conversation.
We
Like,
did.
you and
You're like,
I,
I
like,
am done with you today, actually.
we listen, I wanted to tell you gently, but I'll tell you harshly. Shut
Oh,
up.
okay.
No. Seriously, we have to try and keep it down because, like, as much as I enjoy talking to you, like, let's save some energy. Um,
Save it. Save
so
it for next week. I like
but
that.
yes, yes, but seriously though, like, I love talking to people on the internet. It's one of my very favorite things. I log into LinkedIn every day to see what's going on, as well as other social media accounts. And I like to share and answer questions. I like to engage. I like to post memes. I like to do dumb things on the internet. And
The
I
title
like
of this
to,
episode, I like to do dumb
yes,
things on the internet.
yes, and listen, here's the stinger, all right? If you wanna leave the Design a Good Company LinkedIn group, you do not have to solve a Rubik's Cube first. You can just hit a button and leave it.
But please don't. We want you to be our friends. Just stick around. Hang out for a while. You'll have some fun. But if you wanna leave, it's easy to do, like you said. So
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll try not to shitify the podcast. We're still climbing up. So,
that's it. We're climbing up.
yep.
We'll see y'all again next week.
All right, bye.